All right, we are live now. In fact, I'm going to go and send a link to this to the Docs Team IRC channel just to see if anyone can join us. All right, so the topic of this is to get ready for Unity 8 to become the new desktop for Ubuntu and the need for new documentation that that's going to bring in. There's already a lot of docs that have been written around Unity 7 and all of our traditional desktop apps. That's going to need to get replaced for Unity 8 and all the new apps we're bringing in for that. And one of the things that I'd like to do differently this time is to try and add some more automation where we can, because keeping up the documentation has always been a struggle. Keeping a docs team that can keep up with that has always been a struggle. So the more that we can automate and take out of having to do manually will be a big benefit for us. So traditionally, it's all just been written in the wiki. Screenshots were taken manually and uploaded to the wiki. And knowing when something has changed to know when the documentation needs to be uploaded has been done manually, and rarely, I think, has been part of the problem, because if you don't test it regularly, you don't know when something's broken. I'm hoping that for Unity 8, we will be able to tie things a little bit closer to the code itself. Either having a documentation package that's part of Unity 8, or a wider meta Unity 8 desktop package that contains docs, in order to get those generated. Is that something that you think we could include in there using something like QDoc?
I'm still not exactly sure what kind of documentation you're talking about. Like, is it mostly how to set it up or how to contribute?
How to use it, really.
How to use it, really.
Yeah, let me see if I can get an example. I'm going to post this in the IRC. So this is the current stable release docs for Vivid. And it does cover quite a bit. I know that a lot of this is going to be outside of Unity 8 itself, but for like the desktop apps and Windows section, it's really going to be tied closely to how Unity 8 actually works. So getting docs from a package that's tied to source has worked out really well so far for the API side of things. We always know that if this version of a package is installed, then this version of the docs is what applies to it. And that's made the maintenance of that quite a bit easier than if we were having to go through and update things manually. So if we could do something similar for at least part of these docs, to be able to generate them from markup that you add to the code, and when you change the code, you change the documentation markup that goes along with it, that would be a huge reduction in the maintenance burden of these docs.
Right. I'm not really aware of such a thing using QDoc, like that's really tailored for developer documentation right now. I'm not saying that it's not possible.
It's a bunch of HTML web pages, though. Generally, that's
yeah.
We can just put raw HTML files somewhere in our docs subfolder of Unity 8, and they can be maintained from there. Like, we will probably, we want to have developer documentation in there as well, so that'll probably be more embedded in the code and maybe a couple of separate HTML files. But For user docs, it could go there. Do we really want that though? So you were saying Unity 7 case, the documentation for users was in a separate place entirely, and keeping that in line with the Unity 7 that was released was difficult.
Yeah, so it was kept in a separate Bazaar branch. I think it was using docbook format or something like that. So the documentation team is already familiar with, using Bazaar and keeping it up in some kind of markup in that. So they would be able to help, even if the code itself or the documentation itself is in one of Unity's branches.
So one thing that comes to my mind right now is the procedure. If that documentation would be part of the code base, it obviously would also need to go through the whole CI train and everything.
Right.
Which has ups and downs, I think. It might be very, it might be a huge burden for, drive-by contributors or something to be able to handle that. Which, takes a while. It requires feedback, constant back and forth.
Yeah. It would be like adding requiring unit tests or integration tests for any merge proposals. So yeah, it would be an additional burden on the people who are contributing. Yeah. It's not really introducing a new burden, it's just shifting it from the docs team to the person making the change.
Yeah, probably. I don't really know how the current docs team actually operates. So.
Let's see if anyone's replied to me.
Another slightly annoying consequence would be having large images in our repository, which is a bit of a pain too.
Or another thing I wanted to bring up is the ability to script taking screenshots. So if we know, we want a picture of the dash with a certain search query in it, can we automate getting to that point and then taking a screenshot? That way, that can be part of the CI build process and not something that's checked into code.
It sounds like something Autopilot could do, but exactly where in the build process that would get done, that would need to be figured out. It would effectively have to be running an installed version of Unity 8 on pretty much a physical machine or inside a virtual machine, and then taking the snapshot there. So it would be not continuous integration, but some form of full stack test thingy somewhere. But I think it could be done as part of Autopilot tests.
Does Unity currently go through that kind of full stack test?
So for our Autopilot tests, we do, but that's on the phone only. On the desktop, I don't believe we have any such a test architecture set up yet, but naturally that has to be done.
Right.
But it is a cool idea. I like the idea. It'd be also great to have localized screenshots for people, but then we're, getting big screenshots and saving them, and that's a lot of the space. But it would mean that screenshots would not need to be saved in the repository anymore. They could be somehow auto-generated afterwards.
Yeah, if they're being generated through the CI process, they can even be uploaded to something like Swift, where it doesn't matter if we're storing big files.
True. But then there's no human being checking that they're right.
Right.
And that could cause more confusion than anything else.
It could, yes. So what we're doing for the API docs is we are pulling them directly from the source packages in the archives, but we're only doing that automatically for the development version. So once we have a stable version of the API, that will get freezed and it's not going to get automatically updated anymore. So worst case scenario, a bad screenshot is uploaded for development docs. But then we can go through and check it that everything's good before we freeze those for the stable release.
Hmm. So I'm kind of trying to link this up with how we release our code. Like we have our CI train process, we go through, we test everything, and then once we have approved, okay, this is good code, then we release it. Um, I don't see how that works with docs because that would mean that every time we run um, documentation changes through our CI tool, then it will also generate brand new screenshots, and then some human being is going to have to sit down and check through all of those screenshots manually. And that will have to happen at every time we try to land some code. That's not doable. That's too much work.
Mm. Yeah, I don't think that that'll work as part of our side process. That's just, because it's going to be huge data and it's going to slow up development down too much.
Like it
But
might
doesn't
be
that slow
cool as
down?
part of, we're just about to release the next version of Ubuntu, then we can go through a spin of auto generate, get
Right.
screenshots, then test, boom, that's cool. But we can't do it per release. It's too much burden.
That's fine. It can be a separate build process that only gets run once all the regular code tests pass and you're happy with a release. It doesn't have to be necessarily every single uh, merge that lands. Right, so D Smithies has been saying some things on IRC that I've been missing. Um, D Smithies, if you want to join the Hangout, let me put the URL in there. Actually, anybody who wants to join the Hangout on video, you don't have to be on video. If you don't have a webcam or you want to just turn your webcam off and use audio, that's fine too. So he says that screenshots, they've tried to automate screenshots before and it never really worked. And localization never worked either because nobody did them. He says they currently review screenshots on a per cycle basis. So they could still do that. Having the screenshots automated would make that easier for them, I think, because then they wouldn't have to take them individually. They just have to go through and take a look at them. And we should be able to automate getting a list of where all the screenshots are so they can just, hit one URL at a time and make sure it looks good.
The thing is, what's faster, scripting it or just taking a screenshot and saving it to a file yourself?
In the long run, scripting it is definitely faster.
Sure, but there's an initial cost right now, and maintaining those scripts have a maintenance burden as well.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think maintenance is actually the problem. Like, we all know how fragile full stack tests are, and if we're gonna do autopilot thing to drive it somewhere, that might work. But then if you only run that shortly before doing a release, that means there is a half a year time in between, and autopilot just it just won't pass for sure.
Right.
I'm a little worried that it's being too clever. It's doable, sure, but it does come up with complexity issues. Although, somebody going around hitting print screen all the time is not a very fun job either, but I think maintaining these scripts is probably more painful than anything else.
Also, I don't think that every screenshot needs to be updated all the time. I mean, like looking at the example you posted, then there is, like, for example, how to use the launcher. And okay, I agree, the launcher icons might update over time, but it's not that, it's going to be different how to use it. So, is it really a problem if that screenshot does not reflect the very, very latest artwork?
Yeah, they don't all have to be updated. The problem is knowing which ones have to be updated. And I don't think there's any good way to be able to tell which ones need to be updated and which ones don't.
But that problem also applies to the text, actually, even more than to the screenshots.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
All right. So D Smithies says last cycle 4 out of 11 screenshots changed. Now that's Unity 7, and the changes that have gone into Unity 7 over the last 2 cycles aren't going to be representative of the changes that are going to go into Unity 8 over the next 2 cycles. I expect Unity 8 is going to change quite a bit as we add all the desktop stuff to it.
Fair enough.
Well, the core design of the desktop isn't going to change hugely. Graphically, things will be shimmied up a little bit, look a little prettier perhaps, and there may be some differences like Alt-Tab. But the launcher will pretty much look the same, the panel will be there, and most applications will also look the same. I'm not so sure how big a difference there will be shifting to Unity 8. The ambition is not to have that big a difference.
Yeah, the question is really, did those screenshots need to be changed, or have they just changed? Some contributor came by and said, oh, there could be a newer one because the artwork changed a little.
Right. But again, it's the knowing which ones that are the most expensive part right now. Which is why I was hoping that we could have a way to automate replacing all of them relatively easily. That way you wouldn't have to care which ones needed it or not because they all get it anyway.
Sure, I see the motivation, but there's a cost.
Yeah. So, D-Smithies, what was used previously to try and automate taking these screenshots? Was it autopilot, or was it just some other set of scripts that would try and set up the right circumstances for the screenshot to be taken? Because I think autopilot might make this an easier thing, because we're already scripting things like click this button and make sure this window's open. It wouldn't be a big step from there to say also, okay, now take a screenshot and save it in a specific location.
That happens when the test fails. I guess we already have updated screenshots from everything.
Yeah, that's already happening. We already take screenshots for test cases.
Well, I guess that could be a question for Leo, actually. Like, he's really aware of the full stack testing, and it might actually be feasible to add some, do a screenshot on each test run and replace the old one. But then I don't know enough about the full stack test suite that Leo is running.
Who was it you said is running it?
Leo.
Okay. All right, this Smithy says it was just some script. So if we can have autopilot automatically do these, is this something that you think can live inside Unity 8's code, or should this be a separately maintained thing that we just try and keep in sync with the code as the code evolves?
So right now that full stack test suite is actually already a separate thing. And it does not only test Unity, it tests the whole Ubuntu, basically. So I would say hook it up there. However, the data it produces should probably not live in that repository either. So there needs to be some more things to push the screenshots somewhere, and then obviously expiring old ones and keeping track of data management. So, but yeah, the only thing that this could maybe happen, I really see, is in that full stack test suite.
All right, Michael, can you send me a link to that full stack testing?
So I'll dig it out.
And D. Smithies, can you send me the link to the scripts that you were using previously?
Okay, I pinged Leo. Maybe he has time to join this for a question, what he thinks about it.
All right, so that was the first part of my ideas for this. The second part was actually being able to tell when documentation is no longer accurate, which is a harder problem. And my thoughts for that would be that maybe we can produce an autopilot test that actually runs through the steps that the documentation says to run through. So mimicking what a user would do if they followed the docs, and then making sure that that still works and passes. Which we could do as part of the whole process of taking screenshots if it's already going to be something that lives in a separate code base and runs in a separate process. Hey, Leo.
Hello, how are you?
Good. So we were talking about trying to automate documentation and screenshots using autopilot scripts against the Unity 8 code base.
Okay, so
And Michael was saying that you are the guy to talk to about this full stack testing that's already being done.
right, but what do you want to automate? You have documentation and you want to take screenshots, and what are the tests?
So either piggybacking off of the actual tests or having a separate project but similar in approach where it would run through a bunch of autopilot scripts and take screenshots as it goes to use in documentation.
I see, like you have the tutorial and you want to document how a user should go through the tutorial, so you have an autopilot script to simulate the user,
right,
and take screenshots on the way.
So I think realistically that's not gonna, it's not gonna happen as a separate autopilot script basically, because it will just break and the maintenance effort will be too high. But what could happen is the stack suite, the test suite that we already have, and we're making sure this always works, might flag tests with some, some header or something. Take a screenshot of this, and then as the test suite goes, it automatically produces screenshots that we could reuse. That was just an idea, and basically we asked you to join to ask if you think that's feasible or if I'm going crazy right now.
So to see if I understand, the purpose is to always get an updated screenshot, right? If you change the UI, that the documentation gets updated automatically.
right.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. I have never thought about it, but we have these autopilot tests that should always finish a user story from start to end. We can capture screenshots at any point during the execution, and we can collect them as artifacts that you can then consume and upload to the documentation site. That could work. I'm not sure if, I've never tried it, so a lot of things can go wrong in there. Like the autopilot tests are not so stable. If the UI is changing, the test needs to change, so the documentation needs to change too. Like there's no automatic way to generate the documentation without some manual steps in there.
Right. But really, that's what we want to do anyway. We want to make sure that the documentation is updated in step with the actual code changes.
Okay.
It's not the tests, like if the test fails and the test needs to be changed, so then the system would automatically raise it somewhere, hey, wait, this user story changed. The test didn't pass anymore. Please someone make sure the documentation is updated.
Right.
Yeah, that's like going the normal path. What Michael wants sounds really cool, but let's see. We can do some things like uh, annotate the test. So between each step in Python, you will have a step in English that will then be selected for, I don't know, uh, exported into a JSON or something into HTML. And for each step that's annotated, we take a screenshot. So if you update the test to make it pass, you will have to update the annotations too, and you tell it to generate the document for you. That sounds really cool.
We don't necessarily have to have the documentation as annotations in the test. They can live separately, and it's just whoever's updating one is going to update the other too.
Right, but then you get the manual step of linking a screenshot to a step into the documentation. That's not going to be automated. You will have to do it manually.
Right. So whoever's maintaining these documentation tests will also be maintaining the actual documentation itself.
Right.
I don't think there's a technical way to tie those two strongly together.
Again, I think if this is going to be a separate sort of test suite, it's probably get outdated and no one. Yeah, it'd be great. But I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think that's right. We can start. Well, we can start by saying that every user story that's documented needs an autopilot test. That makes a lot of sense, because then we are sure that what we are documenting will always work. Next thing we can do is, like what Michael said, put a rule in the process that if the autopilot test that's backing the documentation fails, that should trigger some documentation update, or at least to talk with Michael's team to make sure that it gets updated. That's something we don't have yet, so that would be a step forward. And then we can look at ways to automate things. We can put screenshot statements in the autopilot test, and maybe we run those screenshots only when we pass a flag. So for the documentation team to update the screenshots, they will just have to run these tests with the flag, and they will get the screenshots into the artifacts directory collected for them. That I'm not so sure that will save a lot of time. Like, okay, you won't have to do it manually and take the screenshots. Is that like a huge win for you?
Not so much saving people from taking the screenshots, but saving somebody from having to track what screenshots need to be taken. That's where the things usually fall apart. Is, you know, nobody knows what screenshots are out of date, so nobody knows which screenshots to go and take new ones of.
Okay, that makes sense too. When you are writing a test that's present in the documentation, you have to make sure to take a screenshot for every step. So then the people writing the docs will know that they have to write something for each one of those. That makes sense too. I think we can get something valuable in small steps here. But doing it fully automated sounds like not so easy at this point.
Yeah, that's pretty much the concern that Jerry raised before.
Do you have like a simple project that we can start playing with. Like if you have documents for the wizard or the tutorial, maybe we can start linking them to the current tests that we have. There are some on the Sanity Suite, there are some on Unity 8. See if we can give you the screenshots as you like and see what else we can automate from there.
Yeah, I think that's the next thing to do is to just pick one specific use case and try this and see what technical hurdles we're going to run into. So either the welcome screen or just a real simple, like using the dash to search for something in a scope.
Yeah, I think it could be a fun thing to play around with and prototype.
Okay, so I'll take that one, and I'm going to pull in balloons to help me with the autopilot stuff of that. Leo, if you can send me the current testing branch, because I don't want to start landing it in there until we actually know that this is going to work and that's where we want it to live. But I'll either branch it or start something new with just this prototype in it, but with the same kind of setup.
Right. Thinking about it, I think it makes sense for this to be part of the Sanity Suite, not for the Unity 8 suite. So I will give you a link to a couple of simple tests in there that we can annotate. We can extend.
And again, hopefully this is not something that the Unity developers have to spend a lot of time maintaining. We have people who know how to write autopilot tests and do a lot of that. We know people who know how to write docs and do a lot of that. It's just a matter of getting everybody to collaborate on the same thing.
It requires people when they're writing tests to be also really careful about not referring to strings which can be localized. So if I want to refer to a window, using this title is a bad idea because that string can be localized. So it just requires care in writing tests too.
Yeah, and I know for QML at least they can use internal IDs to reference things regardless of what the actual text is.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
So I pasted in the channel a simple example. That's the tutorial. If you look at that file, well, we need a screenshot between every swipe, probably. Yeah, I'm thinking we can do a lot of cool things in there. We can actually annotate the steps somehow, or even use doc strings, and then do some clever Sphinx processing of the test. So a screenshot is linked to a doc string. That could work, but it's not so easy. So let's go slower. Let's start with just the screenshots and see how it goes.
Right. Okay, so this is testing the intro tutorial you get on first boot.
Yes.
Okay. Are we going to have that on the desktop, or is that just going to be on phones and tablets?
No idea.
I don't know.
By convergence, we should.
Yeah.
Eventually, we'll run it on all form factors. There's no way around it. Right now, most likely it only happens on the phone.
Okay. It may take something like scopes then that I know is already going to be there for desktop testing.
Okay, let me give you the install application one. But this is bigger. This has more steps. Let me see what.
And these are run by Jenkins? Is that how this works?
Not yet, but they should. Yes. Currently we have Jenkins machine in one of the team members' office, but CI is working on getting this set up.
Okay. All right, so Nick and I will work on a prototype of this, and then we will present it to you guys and the docs team and the QA community, and make sure that everybody likes the idea and thinks that we can run with it. And if not, we will have to figure out something else to do. And we always have the fallback to keep doing docs the way we have been. I was hoping that we could take this opportunity to make that a little bit easier of a job.
Well, if this works out, it sounds like it should be easier.
All right. Are there any potential problems I haven't thought of yet that you guys can see?
Nothing that we haven't mentioned yet. Like, the biggest problem is probably going to be maintenance of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's really the thing we need to figure, if it works out or not.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, if we link these to the sanity suite or to already existing tests that we need to keep in sync, then, well, it's a problem that we already have to solve.
Yeah.
Okay, the last link I sent is to the take screenshot method in Autopilot. It will collect the screenshot into the subunit stream. Jenkins will collect the subunit stream. There are some tools to extract files from the subunit stream, but that's not automatically done by Jenkins. So we need to think a little about that too. How are you going to extract the steps? How are you going to know which screenshot relates to each step? Maybe by the file name or something like that.
Yeah, we would have to probably... So I'd suggested maybe using Swift to upload these screenshots, in which case we would just use the Python Swift client, and it would... Whoever writes the documentation would know what URL it's being put on Swift, and just use that in the docs.
Okay.
Alrighty, well, I've got my work items. I know what I'm doing with this. And I'll get back to you guys once we have something to show.
Yeah, doesn't work yet.
Thanks.
Say that again? Sorry, I missed what I said.
Just saying thanks and bye.
Okay.
See,
All right,
see you
thanks
later.
everyone.
Okay, thank you.